Alright, hello, my name is Selena Paulin, and this is going to be my presentation about the energy, biomolecules, and the cellular life. This is for my class, Biology 1406, and my professor is Dr. Waylard. We're going to start off with talking about the relationship between energy, the biomolecules, and the cell and the life processes. We are going to be going in depth explaining each phase and how they work together to be able to help us function. How the cells obtain and use energy. Cells have a specific primary energy carrier in which the cell is ATP. This is adenosine triphosphate. This helps to store energy in high energy bonds between the phosphate groups when a cell needs to acquire energy, which is converting ATP to ADP plus pi, or adenosine disphosphate plus a phosphate. It breaks one of those groups apart, then it releases the energy, which is used to power activities like muscle contraction, protein synthesis, active transport, and cellular respiration. Cells produce ATP through the process called cellular respiration. So, since cells use ATP to process through the process of cellular respiration, it breaks down food molecules, glucose, to release energy. There are two types, which are the aerobic respiration with oxygen and the anaerobic respiration without oxygen. So right here is the aerobic respiration with oxygen, and on my right side I have the anaerobic respiration without oxygen. So right here, this picture that I have, it shows both of them. So on my right side I have the aerobic respiration with oxygen, which mainly occurs in like plants, animals, and fungal cells. This takes place majority of it in the mitochondria, and it starts off with glucose, which then processes to glycolysis and the pyruvate. And since the oxygen is present, it then goes to the Krebs cycle, which is the citric acid cycle as well. It has two words for it, and it takes place in the mitochondrial matrix. It generates energy-rich molecules, which are NADH and FADH2. And after this happens, it creates the electron transport chain located in the mitochondrial inner membrane. It also uses it uses what is produced from the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, which is NADH/FDH2, to produce from starting 32 to 36 ATP, and as well as water. And the ATP produced is per glucose molecule. And on my left side, I have the anaerobic respiration with the oxygen, which is the set right here. Like I said, they both start off with glucose, and from there it goes to glycolysis. They both have two similar steps in the beginning, because that's how they need to be able to start off to be able to make the production that they make. Once it moves to glycolysis, the pyruvate is converted to lactic acid, which is in animals, or alcohol or CO2 in yeast. This leads to the stage of fermentation and the other stage of aerobic respiration. So it also needs ATP, and the oxygen is not present in this cellular respiration process. So like how I said, it starts off with the glucose, and it goes to glycolysis, and then from there it goes to the purate. So with that as well, the 2 ATP is needed, and afterwards, since the oxygen is not present, it goes to fermentation, and from there it goes to the lactic acid or ethanol, which is like an alcohol, animals, and yeast, like how I said. And basically this slide right here, it shows everything that I just mentioned and explained using this picture. And from here, we're going to move on to the mitochondria. The mitochondria is known as a powerhouse of the cell. They are the main site of aerobic and ATP production. One thing about the mitochondria is that they have a double membrane. So as you see on the picture that I have on the right side, it has the outer membrane and the inner membrane. And from there, that is where the, like how I said, aerobic respiration happens in the ATP production. And then right here in the crystalline junction is where the anaerobic respiration happens without oxygen. The outer membrane closes off the organelle, and the inner membrane is folded into the crystal to help increase the surface area for electron transport. So that is where the electron transport chain happens in the crystal right here, the crystal junction. They contain their own DNA and enzymes necessary for energy production, which allows them to carry out many steps of respiration on their own. And from here, we're going to move on to the integration in the cell. We are going to be talking about the energy biomolecules interact inside the cell to be able to support processes like membrane transport, enzyme activity, and genetic information flow. So these are the different support processes, which is the membrane transport. The membrane transport is the way substances move in and out of cells, which is essential for maintaining homeostasis. So in this picture right here, I'm going to be explaining both of the membrane transports, which is the passive transport and active transport. So on my left side, I have the passive transport, and that side does not require energy. So it has diffusion as well as osmosis, which I did not include in this, but I did put facilitated diffusion. So since the passive transport does not require energy, they are able to easily go in and out of the cell, like how it shows right here, having no problem. And on my right side is the active transport, and the active transport does require energy. So since it has ATP is required because it helps to move substances against their concentration gradient. So with the ATP, it is able to move substances more easier in and out. The ATP is what helps that work. And then we move on to the different support processes, which is the enzyme activity. Enzymes are proteins which speed up the chemical reaction by lowering the activation energy. The role of energy and biomolecules. ATP is often used to drive enzyme catalyze reactions such as DNA replication or metabolism. Enzymes themselves are made of proteins whose structure determine their function. And then cofactors, which are metal ions, and coenzymes, vitamins, are sometimes needed to help enzyme functions. And then we also have genetic information flow. The flow of genetic information follows the central dogma, and it goes in a specific order, starting from DNA, then it goes to RNA, and then lastly proteins. DNA replication, transcription, and translations are the process of DNA. So it starts off with replication, which is the DNA copies itself before self-division. Then it goes on to transcription. The DNA is used to make the messenger RNA, which is mRNA. And then it goes to translation. The ribosomes read the mRNA to build the proteins. And then the roles of energy and biomolecules. ATP and GTP, another energy molecule, are required for all the steps, especially during transcription and translation. Nucleotides, DNA, and RNA building blocks are assembled into new strands using enzymes and energy. Ribosomes made of RNA and proteins and tRNA molecules help assemble amino acids into proteins. And then the final proteins are produced into enzymes, transporters, and structural molecules necessary for all the other cellular functions. And then in real world application, an example that shows the importance of understanding cellular energy, biomolecules, and their interaction is a mitochondrial disease, in which is a group of disorders caused by failure in the mitochondria. The mitochondrial disease happens when the mitochondria is responsible for producing ATP through aerobic respiration and it fails to produce correctly. The disorders can be inherited and affects the cells that need a lot of energy, especially the ones in the brain, liver, muscle, in the brain, heart, liver, and muscle. So with this, I'm going back to the different support processes because the role of biomolecules and energy. So that takes place because how I'm mentioning right here, the proteins embedded in the cell membrane act as a pump or channels. The main example is the sodium potassium pump. So this helps for us to be able to process down glucose and our insulin levels. And if there's too much potassium or too low sodium, that is like a fail in the mitochondria, because this then leads to like diabetes or diabetes 2 or pre-diabetic. So the ATP powers the active transport processes like the moving ions or nutrient movings into the cell. Lipids make up the membrane that proves a barrier which controls what enters and exits, like especially phospholipids. So yeah, like in the real world, like that's one of the main things is like not being able to break down glucose and for your body to have enough insulin. So that's why the sodium potassium pump is very essential, especially for ATP, because that is what we need. So going back to the real world application, the energy production ATP is faulty. Mitochondria produces less ATP, leading to energy shortages and critical issues. That mainly goes for like working out, because that is how there's like muscle weakness if there's not enough ATP, and that causes them to fade. And that explains the symptoms like muscle weakness, neurological problems, fatigue, and organ dysfunction, as well as like organ dysfunction if there's like any mutations that run in like a family. It starts off with like one generation and then it just keeps on going on to the next and next. Well, it skips a generation and then it goes on to the next generation, but either way it just keeps on going like that. And since the cycle keeps on repeating and it's not being worked on, like it's just gonna make the issue more worse to the part where like they simply can't live such a long life like how they're supposed to. And that's one thing that needs to be fixed, because if not, the organ dysfunction is not going to be well, and it needs to be able to be well as like a healthy person to be able to live a life. And the cellular respiration, mutations in the mitochondrial DNA or in nuclear genes, which is like how I was talking about the organ dysfunction, that if it's not working well, then then the body's not going to be able, if the mitochondria is not working well, then it's just not going to be able to have a well organ system. So it's going to go into organ dysfunctions and organ failure, and it needs to be well so we could be alive, and that is what makes us us. And in conclusion, the cells obtain energy by breaking down glucose essentially through aerobic respiration, which takes place in the mitochondria. Then it produces huge amounts of ATP. When oxygen is not present, it then switches to anaerobic respiration, which is not the best, but it works as well. ATP is the immediate source of energy for most of the cellular processes. Cellular life depends on integration of energy and biomolecules, which is ATP, provides energy to make reactions, proteins, and enzymes, makes most of the functional and structural roles, and lipids form membranes, as well as the nucleic acid stores and transmit genetic information. Altogether, they can carry vital processes of membrane transport, enzyme function, gene expression, response to its environment, reproduce, and enabling the cell to grow. The mitochondria is known as the cell's powerhouse because they are the main site of aerobic respiration and ATP production. They have a double membrane and an outer membrane and a highly folded inner membrane called the cristae, which increases surface area for the electron transport chain. Mitochondria also contains their own DNA and enzymes, allowing them to perform many steps of respiration independently. Mitochondrial diseases are inherited disorders caused by malfunctioning mitochondria, which are responsible for producing ATP through aerobic respiration. So this basically sums up my presentation for the energy, biomolecules, and the cell in life. And I mainly break down the relationship between each phase and how they are able to work to help us function and make us who we are.